Good evening. This week we are doing the post-mortem of the 2026 national budget, which was unveiled by the Minister of Finance, Professor Motuli Ncube, last Thursday. And to discuss that with us tonight on the program is the Chief Executive Officer of the Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Christopher Takunda Mugaga. Mr. Mugaga, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure is mine. Good evening, viewers.
Mr. Mugaga,
Thank you.
a lot of people have responded negatively to the budget that was unveiled by the Minister of Finance, Prof. Ncube. And they said it should have done much better. In your view, before we go into what's wrong with it, what is it that it should have done?
Thank you so much. Well, in a case of an economy which is almost as good as a working textbook of pathology, where you know the arteries had been clogging, the veins had been tired, and the economy needs reboot. Naturally, it's an economy which requires incentives more than anything else. But a high-level view of the budget itself is proving that the whole agenda was on extracting from business, from the households, more than giving back to those sectors of the economy. So it's a tax budget. And once a budget is a focus on taxation more than anything, it becomes a very unhealthy and to a certain extent toxic budget, given the restive poverty population which is excluded, the Gini coefficient which is wide, the interest rates which are too high, the borrowing costs or lending costs which are too high. All those factors, when a budget is coming, you look at them and say, is this budget going to extricate this particular economy from the mess it is currently somehow locked in?
Mm-hmm. You use a very powerful word, extracting. It's all about extracting because there are too many taxes. But doesn't that betray a man who is down to bare bones in terms of raising revenue? Because clearly, we could all see that he extracted more than he gave. So are we not seeing decisions that actually portray a government that is on its knees in terms of revenues? Because there could not have been any other way of making sure that the revenues were going to be raised. So other people will argue. But in your view, are there any other ways of making sure that the government can raise more revenues other than taxing people?
I think it's actually quite unfortunate that most people think when you're announcing a fiscal policy, the focus is on raising revenue. You raise revenue because the potential sources of revenue are strong enough to sustain the whole process. Maybe if I may give you a picture of what happened in South Africa, in Kenya, and few economies, maybe as I come back home, it will give you a context than maybe just to criticize, to say, look, why is he taxing? The 1st of May this year, when Minister Ino Gonogwana, who is the current Minister of Finance in South Africa, pushed for VAT increase from the current 15% in South Africa to 15.5%, exactly what we are having in Zimbabwe at the moment. The ANC government, the coalition partners, including COSATU, the labor union, they vehemently opposed the move, let alone not trying to analyze the level of poverty between the two economies. It could not test the test. It could rather not stand the test of the market, the whole proposal from Ino Gonogwana. And they dropped the increase because they know the implications of pushing down consumer spending. Going to East Africa, William Ruto, he tried the same thing with the whole finance bill, which had to pass through the parliament to approve the housing facility, where the argument was, let's provide accommodation to Kenyans who are living in slums. They resisted. The issue is not in raising revenue. It's in empowering the citizens first before you look for revenue. If you are to do a trend analysis for our economy right now, macroeconomic framework, just looking at the non-tax revenue or the revenue coming from any source outside tax. In 2024, it was somewhere around 600 million, slightly above a billion. It went to around 400, as we are predicting this year. Next year, we are looking at slightly above 300. In fact, from 250 to 28 million. The decline in non-tax revenue is showing that the over-reliance on taxation means the government is failing on utilizing other potential sources of revenue. What are those sources of revenue? Firstly, state-owned enterprises, they should be declaring dividends to the government. There should be a question on why do we need all these assets which are in chronic deficits. Border customs duty is still quite high, the duty we have in the country. But regardless, we've seen a dwindling, possibly due to corruption, especially at the points of entry into the country. So to believe that if we push an agenda of taxing people to the bone, we'll balance the books. But at the same time, the conundrum is failing also to pay the exporters, the surrender. Failing to pay the miners, what is true. So it's a case of a parent sitting in the house and say, I'd earned $2,000 as my salary. But for the better part of the month, possibly 3 weeks, children are suffering, there's no food on the table. But you'll be beating your chest to say the 2,000 salary I'd earned, I'd only possibly used 90% of it. Or technically, I'm balancing my books. That's what we have. So that's where we have a problem. South Africa said no to VAT. And I also believe the legislatures in Zimbabwe, if they are representing the people honestly, with the plenary levels of poverty in the country, I don't see how the whole push for VAT increase will pass through both houses, the lower and the upper house.
Sure. And the minister, immediately after completing the budget statement, he presented the finance bill and tabled it before the legislators, and they're going to debate it. But already we hear that they are saying that it's got to be tweaked and align with the aspirations of both ordinary citizens and business. So do you believe that because it is not yet a done deal, do you believe that there could be some relief that the minister can actually do through the pressure from the legislators who actually represent the people?
Yeah, pressure from the legislators, pressure from business, pressure from civil society. Because when it's a budget, it's a tool for everyone. We have to understand that. But like I'm saying, we don't expect any typical chief whip of any political party to align legislators, the legislature, especially those MPs who are representing people, knowing the levels of poverty in the country. So I'm quite very confident that there's no way this current budget proposal in its current form will pass through, especially given the usurious taxation at VAT level. You look at taxation at IMT, I think for quite a length of Sundays, an indefinite long time period, we had been lobbying as Chamber of Commerce for the total removal of IMT, knowing the impact it is having. We have engaged a lot of institutions, some of them within or part of the government, and they've not been agreeing also or agreeable to IMT without even mentioning names. But they know the negative impact of high taxation on deposits. But to our shock, yes, on paper it looks like it's good news when you talk of the tax deductibility of IMT.
We'll continue from that after the break. Please join us in the second segment as we do the post-mortem of the 2026 national budget, which, by the way, is going to be debated in Parliament before it is passed. It could have relief, particularly when you consider a lot of people actually saying it was more of extracting than giving relief to both businesses and ordinary citizens. Join us in the second segment. Welcome back. To those who have just joined us, we are in the middle of this week's program where we are in discussion with the Chief Executive Officer of the Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Christopher Takunda Mugaga, discussing the 2026 national budget, which was unveiled last month by the Minister of Finance, Professor Mtuli Ncube, and subsequently tabled before the Parliament for debate before it is either rejected or approved. Mr. Mugaga, before we went to the break, you were talking about the intermediate money transfer tax, that no one really wanted it to continue in its entirety. And a lot of people are saying that it had actually outlived its usefulness, given the high levels of informalization and the dominance of the United States dollars in transactions, particularly cash transactions. So, in your view, reducing it to 1.5 in ZIG transactions and maintaining it at 2% in USD transactions, on paper you are saying that it is actually, it looks progressive, as if it is trying to promote more usage of the ZIG. But in reality, it is what?
Yes. On paper, like we are saying, it looks like a case of extending an olive branch, which looks quite very beautiful. But the principles of taxation, especially in a very informal economy like Zimbabwe, chief amongst them is the issue of simplicity outside efficiency as a principle. Once it becomes difficult to interpret taxation, and at what point would one be convinced that I am eligible for tax deductibility of this particular head of tax, especially given that for most businesses, they failed dismally to comply with taxation, not because they are not law-abiding, but because of the usurious state of the tax levels within the economy, which is the reason why we strongly felt it was very important to push for the complete removal of the IMT. Pushing VAT, I think we also heard the Treasury boss, the Minister of Finance, talking about no need to complain given that VAT, if it's moved to 16%, is within the regional average. Yes, if you look at the regional average, especially SADC, 14 to 16%, except outliers like Tanzania, mainland, where VAT is around 18%. You look at Madagascar, VAT at around 20%. But here's the trick. The regulatory burden, the number of fees and licenses you have to pay in Zimbabwe. The IMT we are talking about. If we were to factor all that and try, given that most of these economies don't have these strange regulatory fees, VAT, if it was to be interpreted by factoring all those, possibly you will look at it above 22% if you were to factor those, assuming they'll be part of this. For Madagascar, yes, VAT 20%, but also it's important for people to appreciate that in Madagascar, basic foodstuffs, healthcare services are exempt from paying VAT. So we certainly don't believe any rational legislator will look at this whole list of proposals and push for their approval, which is the reason why we are so confident that come next week, when the debate on both the finance bill and the appropriations bill kicks off, the debate will be, rather, how do we reduce our expenditures? The whole debate is on raising revenue. What about the expenditure side? One of the major drivers of costs we are having in the government right now is procurement. No one has bothered to try to do a determination of the cost of procurement to GDP. Good things will be on the surface, yes. Infrastructure, you see activities happening, public infrastructure, and to a certain extent private. But at what cost is it coming? And the Treasury boss, how thorough has he been in reducing those costs? Remember, when we're talking of public procurement, it's taxpayers' money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Constitution, if you were to read section 315, it's clear on how procurement should take place in Zimbabwe. Don't worry about other jurisdictions. It has to be transparent. It has to be effective. It has to be honest. It has to be as cost-effective as possible, which is what gave life to PRAS, the Procurement Regulatory Authority. But it appears most people seem not to be interested in understanding the economics of procurement. But once we plug the whole of procurement, possibly, you will see we don't need all these taxes. We are seeing. But because there are leakages, it's a bucket of water, you continue trying to fill it through taxing people. But the leakages will make collecting revenue not making sense. In most economies, especially EU, Hungary, VAT in Hungary, the highest possible in the world, 27%. But you will not hear people complaining much. Why? You see the level of infrastructure. You don't see a pothole. You see the street lighting. You see the water availability. And all what you need in day to day. So the discussion, to me, should not necessarily even be about how to raise taxation. The subject should be, how do we align our costs? Because looking at the export position in terms of receipts, looking at FDI, diaspora remittances, in this economy, we compete so well with most of the regional countries I spoke about. But how are we utilizing the resources? Failure to utilize resources is what is pushing the treasury, the government, to rely on taxation, because it's a short route to collect more.
So, are you saying that we don't seem to account effectively for our resources, or you are saying that there's profligacy? Which is which?
No, you can't separate them. When you fail to account them, profligacy is part of it, because you'll be wasteful in your approach. So our biggest challenge is, my brother, porous borders. There's corruption in this country.
All right. Let's discuss about that in the final segment, because I know it's a thorny issue about corruption. A lot of people have actually said it is the biggest tax on Zimbabweans. Please join us in the final segment as we bring to a close this week's program, where we have been in discussion with the ZNCC Chief Executive, Mr. Christopher Takunda Mugaga, doing a postmortem on the 2026 national budget, which is going to be debated next week in Parliament. Welcome back to those who have been with us from the beginning and those who joined us in the middle of the program. And now, to you who are joining us in this segment, we are at the end of this week's program, and we've been doing a postmortem of the 2026 national budget, which was tabled before the Parliament after the presentation by the Minister of Finance, Professor Mthuli Ncube, last Thursday. And naturally, it was tabled before the Parliament, where it's going to be debated. And if the legislators, they are happy with it, they will approve it. If they are not, they will reject it. And on the program tonight, we've been looking at what the minister should have done, what you could still do, and some of the things that were actually not right and we did not sit right with the majority of Zimbabweans, including business people. Mr. Mugaga, we're talking about the leakages, and we're talking about accountability and profligacy, saying that you can separate the two.
Yes, and this is not rocket science. When you talk about it, it's not speculation. I think if you listen to the head of National Prosecuting Authority in Zimbabwe, the chief prosecutor in government, at one point, very well quoted openly in the public forum, bemoaning the high levels of corruption, be it at border posts or within the country. And the mechanism, obviously, to deal with it had been quite lackluster, which is quite a problem. So when you're dealing with a budget, especially which is quite very aggressive on taxation, it's difficult then to ignore the whole discussion around corruption, because you want to know to what extent are we utilizing the funds which we are taking from the public. It is an issue which needs attention. Remember, I spoke about procurement, value for money. It's also in the public fora, where you hear the Secretary of Treasury at one point talking about how government is being abused by those tenderers who are coming to it. 1.7 billion unvalidated expenditures. I think you saw it in the numbers. So all that is manifestation of corruption in different shapes and colors. So if ever we are to have an effective budget which will transform the agenda of this economy and also be that blueprint which will drive the NDS too, Let's deal with corruption. Reduce the leakages. Expenditure rationalization. You can't continue handing for taxation, hoping that by taxing we'll find our way to turn around the economy. There's no economy in the world which had taxed itself out of poverty. Once you continue taxing, the end result is an informal sector you see expanding. VAT, what are you doing by increasing it? You are entrenching a tax shop culture. Already private sector players complaining about tax shop economy, which is not honoring or paying VAT, and they've been more competitive compared to most formal shops. And by pushing up VAT, what you're simply doing is you're criminalizing the formality. It's a crime to remain formal in this economy. And we hope, as they debate this whole budget, the issue of VAT, it has to be returned to 15%. Mm-hmm. IMT, we believe we can't afford to have it anymore. If ever we are to have a gradual process of pushing away IMT, push it away 1% possibly now, until possibly you exterminate or remove it completely. You asked about 1.5% IMT on local ZIG. You know, the problem with policies, they have what we call the unintended consequences sometimes in economics. On paper, it looks like you reduce the ZIG IMT, it will encourage the use of ZIG. But in other instances, it might not necessarily do that. By reducing the IMT on ZIG and retaining the IMT on US dollars at 2%, it could also be a signal to the market that we are so desperate for this US dollar IMT, we can do away with the ZIG IMT to a certain extent. Vote of no confidence in the local currency. Can you see how the market watches things? So it's not a case of tampering with the numbers. It's a case of having a solid, predictable, sound, and very certain model of managing the economy where over-reliance on taxation is not sustainable. And we've seen the results. ZIMSAS this year released the numbers. Almost 76% of this economy is underground. Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce next week will be releasing the State of Industry and Commerce Survey. And if you to look at the numbers coming out of that study, you see the negative effects high taxation is having, especially on this particular economy.
Yeah, sure. A lot of people have actually said, I mean, look, you can't keep on milking a bleeding cow. Mm-hmm. So we are like a bleeding cow. We can't keep on being taxed. But obviously the man is going to find revenues elsewhere. But look, he had said, I know that a lot of our citizens, the entrepreneurs and you guys in business, you have had a lot of challenges with, the burdensome license fees and taxes. And they said this bill, the finance bill, is going to give legal effect to the ease of doing business, which means that you'll see the culmination, not all of them at once, the combination of the sessional instruments scraping most of these burdensome taxes. Do you believe that once we have done this, the environment, the operating environment will improve, particularly with regards to the high cost to business?
I think it's important to send a message out there that the whole fees you are referring to and the taxation we are discussing right now is symptomatic of an economy which needs to be treated. It's sick. So if you have a sick patient and they don't like the elephantiasis, you don't like the eyes which are turning red, you don't prescribe just the medicine on the eyes which don't look beautiful. You look at the underlying problems. So if we make a mistake of just thinking that by slashing the fees, the economic fundamentals, without correcting them, you solve a problem. It's the same government also which will face a challenge of raising no revenue. They will struggle to have revenue because the fundamentals will not be sound. So to us, the whole honeymoon is not in just slashing fees without an agenda. The agenda is allow the free market, liberalization of the economy, which will allow business to prosper so that they deliver more revenue through taxation without choking them. And this does not just happen by slashing these fees. You can slash the fees, but if you don't correct the fundamentals, you end up in a worse war. But the fundamentals are still bad, and the fees you have slashed have not helped the situation. And you start worrying, like we are having right now with the 2026 budget. You look at the whole policy on permanent establishment, from 183 days to 90 days. In other words, if you're a contractor and you want to operate here, the position was within 90 days, you won't be taxed. I mean, within 123 days, you won't be taxed. But the budget itself, most people actually don't know that provision. Now, within 90 days from the 123 days, government will start taxing any foreign contractor. It shows how much we need the tax. You look at the whole taxation on the funds from outside. If you are to secure a line of credit from outside the country, it has to be taxed. 2018, 2019, that policy was removed. But this particular budget is retained it. You have to be taxed. So what it means to Mr. X business after securing funding, assuming the interest rate is 100%, if government is to tax on that net interest on foreign fund, you as a businessman, you have to top up from the interest you are charged, because the one who is outside who is charging interest will not recognize this particular tax. So it's a cost to business on its own. And the plethora of other taxes like the digital tax, I think everyone is talking about the cash withdrawal levy. So it's symptomatic. And it's also a signal that possibly the level of fiscal deficit which we are currently measured in is higher than possibly what could be reported on.
The economy is sick, and you are saying that hold on to your prescription form. Let's do more examination and deal with the underlying issues. Mr. Mugaga, it's always a pleasure having you on this program.
Man. Thank you, my brother. Thank you very much.
I don't know whether you are also sick, but if you are, please don't just treat the symptoms. Go deeper and go deeper to make sure that you become healthy. Before I leave you, I would like to remind you that we launched Radio 3000, which is part of 3K TV. Radio 3000 2 Mondays ago. And if you want to tune in to the radio that reaches every place in the world, that is global. www.radio3000.co.zw. www.radio3000.co.zw. Positive vibes there. Until next week, we'll see you.